The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Wyoming plains, carrying with it the bitter promise of death. Snow fell thick and heavy, turning the world into a blank canvas of white that seemed to swallow sound, hope, and even the will to live. It was December of 1874, and winter had arrived early with a vengeance that would be remembered for generations. What you're about to witness will challenge everything you believe about love and sacrifice. Because what looks like abandonment isn't always what it seems. Sometimes, the greatest act of love requires letting go of what you treasure most. This isn't the story of a heartless man who left his baby to die in the snow. This is the story of a father who loved his son so much that he chose to save him the only way he knew how. Caleb Carter knelt in the snow, his body racked with violent coughing that painted the white ground with drops of bright red blood. Each breath felt like swallowing broken glass, and he knew his time was running out. The consumption that had been eating away at his lungs for months was winning its final battle. At 32 years old, Caleb looked like a man of 60, his once strong frame reduced to skin and bones, his face gaunt and pale as winter moonlight. In his trembling arms, he held the most precious thing in his world. 6-month-old Samuel Carter was wrapped in his dead mother's wedding shawl, a soft blue fabric that still carried the faint scent of lavender from happier days. The baby's tiny face was red from crying, his small fists waving helplessly in the frigid air. Samuel didn't understand that his father was dying, didn't understand that they hadn't eaten in 3 days, didn't understand that the milk had run out yesterday, and there was no money for more. Caleb had tried everything. He'd sold his cattle, his horse, even his wife's jewelry. The ranch was gone, taken by the bank when he couldn't make the payments after Mary's death and childbirth. He'd begged for work in town, but who would hire a man who collapsed from coughing fits every few hours? Who would trust a man whose hands shook so badly he could barely hold a tool? For 2 weeks, Caleb had watched his son grow weaker. The baby's cries had become softer, more desperate. His little body was losing weight, his skin taking on a grayish tint that terrified his father. Caleb knew that if something didn't change soon, they would both die out here in this abandoned line shack, miles from anywhere, with no one to hear their final moments. That's when Caleb made the most heartbreaking decision of his life. He couldn't save himself, but maybe, just maybe, he could save his son. The trading post at Miller's Creek was only 2 miles away. People passed through there every day, good people who would hear a baby's cry and couldn't ignore it. Someone would find Samuel. Someone would take him in. Someone would give him the life that Caleb could no longer provide. Caleb stood on shaking legs and began the longest walk of his life. Each step through the deep snow sent bolts of pain through his chest, but he pushed forward, driven by a father's desperate love. Samuel whimpered softly against his chest, and Caleb whispered the same words over and over. "I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. Daddy loves you. Daddy loves you so much." When he reached the trading post, Caleb could see warm light glowing in the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the promise of warmth and safety. This was where Samuel needed to be. This was where someone would find him and give him a chance at life. Caleb found a spot near the front porch, sheltered from the worst of the wind, but visible to anyone who might pass by. With hands that shook more from emotion than cold, Caleb unwrapped his son from the shawl and rewrapped him carefully, making sure the baby was as warm as possible. He kissed Samuel's forehead, breathing in that sweet baby smell one last time. "Someone good will find you," he whispered. "Someone who can take care of you the way I can't. I love you, Samuel. I love you more than my own life." The baby looked up at him with those bright blue eyes, so much like his mother's. And for a moment, Caleb's resolve wavered. How could he walk away from his own son? How could he leave this innocent child alone in the world? But then Samuel coughed, a small, weak sound that broke Caleb's heart. The baby was already getting sick. Without proper food, without warmth, without medicine, Samuel would be dead within days. Caleb placed his son gently in the snow near the trading post's front steps, making sure he was visible but protected from wind. He took off his own coat and wrapped it around the baby's shawl, giving Samuel every bit of warmth he could spare. Then, with tears freezing on his cheeks, Caleb Carter turned and walked away from his son. He didn't look back. He couldn't. If he looked back, he would lose his nerve, would run back and gather Samuel in his arms, and then they would both die together in the snow. Instead, Caleb stumbled into the wilderness, following a path that would take him far from the trading post, far from any chance of rescue. He had maybe 3 days left to live, but Samuel might have a lifetime if someone found him soon. The wind carried the sound of a baby's cry across the frozen landscape, but Caleb forced himself to keep walking. What you're hearing isn't the sound of abandonment. It's the sound of salvation. Because sometimes the greatest love requires the ultimate sacrifice. Caleb had given his son the only gift he had left to give, a chance at life. Behind him, baby Samuel's cries echoed through the night, waiting for a miracle that was already on its way. Levi Morrison had been riding through blizzards for 3 days straight, and he was bone-tired. His horse, a sturdy brown mare named Belle, picked her way carefully through the deep snow, her breath creating clouds of steam in the freezing air. Levi pulled his hat down lower and wrapped his coat tighter around his body. He'd been drifting from job to job ever since the war ended, never staying in one place too long, never getting too attached to anyone or anything. At 35, Levi had seen enough heartbreak to last several lifetimes. The Civil War had taken his younger brother. Raiders had burned down his family's farm in Kansas and killed his parents while he was away fighting. His wife Hannah had died of fever while he was still in the army, and their unborn child had died with her. After losses like that, a man learns to keep moving to avoid putting down roots that could be torn up again. Levi had heard there was winter work available at a cattle ranch near Colorado Springs. It wasn't much, just feeding livestock and mending fences through the cold months, but it would give him a warm place to sleep and 3 meals a day. That was more than he'd had in weeks. He figured he could make it to Miller's Creek trading post before nightfall, get a hot meal and a room for the night, then push on to Colorado in the morning. That's when Belle suddenly shied to the left, nearly throwing Levi from his saddle. "Easy, girl," he said, patting her neck. "What's got you spooked?" Belle was usually steady as a rock, not the type to get jumpy over a rabbit or a gust of wind. Levi looked around, trying to see what had startled her. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold and his heart skip a beat. It was faint at first, almost lost in the howling wind, but there was no mistaking what it was. A baby was crying somewhere in the snow. Levi's first instinct was to keep riding. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's problems usually led to nothing but trouble. But the crying continued, weak and desperate, and Levi found himself thinking about his own child who had never been born. What if that was his baby out there? What if someone could have saved his wife and child, but had chosen to ride on by instead? With a heavy sigh, Levi climbed down from his horse and began searching through the snow. The crying was coming from near the trading post's front steps, but it was hard to pinpoint exactly where. The wind kept shifting the sound around, making it seem like it was coming from everywhere at once. Finally, Levi spotted a small bundle wrapped in what looked like a man's coat. For a moment, he couldn't believe his eyes. Who would leave a baby out here in the middle of a blizzard? Was this some kind of trap? Were outlaws using a crying baby to lure travelers into an ambush? But when Levi knelt down and carefully pulled back the coat, he saw a tiny face red with cold and fury. This was a real baby, probably no more than 6 months old, and he was very much alive. The little one was wrapped in a blue shawl that might have been pretty once, but now it was damp with snow and couldn't provide much warmth against the brutal cold. Levi's hands shook as he picked up the baby, and not just from a cold. He hadn't held a child since his nephew had been born 10 years ago, back before the war changed everything. The baby was lighter than he expected, and Levi could feel how the little body was trembling from the cold. Those tiny fingers were turning blue, and the baby's cries were getting weaker by the minute. "What am I supposed to do with you?" Levi muttered, but even as he said it, he was already wrapping the baby inside his own coat, sharing his body heat. The baby's cries quieted slightly, and Levi felt a strange tug in his chest. This little one was completely helpless, completely dependent on whoever found him. And right now, that someone was Levi. Levi looked around the empty landscape, hoping to see some sign of the baby's parents. Maybe they were nearby, maybe there had been an accident, maybe they were hurt and needed help. But there was nothing, just endless snow and the wind that seemed to cut right through a man's bones. Whoever had left this baby here was long gone. The smart thing would be to take the baby to the trading post and leave him there. Let someone else deal with this problem. Levi had his own life to worry about, his own plans to make. He didn't need to get tangled up in some family drama or whatever situation had led to a baby being abandoned in the snow. But as Levi stood there holding the tiny bundle, feeling the baby's small body gradually warming against his chest, he found he couldn't just walk away. Maybe it was the memory of his own lost child, or maybe it was just basic human decency. But Levi knew he had to do something. This baby needed help and needed it fast. "Come on, Belle," Levi said, climbing back onto his horse with the baby safely tucked inside his coat. "Looks like we're taking a detour." Levi rode hard toward the town of Millbrook, 5 miles south of the trading post. It was the nearest place with a doctor and people who might be able to help care for a baby. The whole way there, Levi kept talking to the little one, trying to keep him calm and warm. "Don't you worry, little fella," he said. "We'll find someone to take care of you. Someone who knows about babies and such. I'm not much good with young ones, but I won't let anything happen to you." The baby had stopped crying and seemed to be sleeping, which worried Levi more than the crying had. Was that normal or was it a bad sign? Levi didn't know anything about babies, but he knew enough to recognize that this little one was in serious trouble. When Levi rode into Millbrook, snow was falling harder than ever, and the main street was nearly deserted. Most folks were smart enough to stay inside by their fires on a night like this. Levi headed straight for the general store, which seemed to be the only building with lights still on. He burst through the door, bringing a gust of cold wind and snow with him. The baby, startled by the sudden warmth and light, began crying again. Several people who had been standing around the pot-bellied stove turned to stare at Levi with suspicious eyes. "Help," Levi said, his voice rough from the cold. "I found this baby in the snow. He needs milk and warmth, and I don't know what else. Can someone help me?" The silence that followed was thick as molasses. Levi could see the thoughts running through their minds as clearly as if they were speaking out loud. Where had this baby come from? Why did this stranger have someone else's child? Was Levi telling the truth, or had he stolen this baby from somewhere? Sheriff Coleman, a big man with a gray beard and hard eyes, stepped forward. "Well now," he said slowly, "that's quite a story. Mind telling me exactly where you found this baby, and why we should believe you didn't take him from his rightful parents?" Levi's heart sank as he realized what kind of trouble he'd walked into. He tried to do the right thing, but now it looked like he might be accused of kidnapping. The baby in his arms cried harder, as if sensing the tension in the room. "I swear I'm telling the truth," Levi said. "I found him near Miller's Creek trading post, wrapped in a coat and left in the snow. Whoever left him there is long gone. This baby needs help right now, or he's going to die." But Levi could see that Sheriff Coleman wasn't convinced, and neither were the other townspeople. They were looking at him like he was a criminal, and Levi realized that his life had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. The baby's cries echoed through the store, and Levi knew that time was running out. Someone had to help this child, but first, Levi was going to have to prove he wasn't a kidnapper. And that might be harder than saving the baby's life. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's main street, but Levi Morrison felt no warmth from its rays. Wanted posters bearing his weathered face now adorned every storefront, each one declaring him a suspected kidnapper. Sheriff Coleman had worked through the night, his suspicion having transformed into a manhunt that would either clear Levi's name or see him swinging from a rope. Wanted for questioning in missing child case, the bold letters proclaimed. Levi Morrison, drifter, armed and dangerous. The sketch artist had captured his hollow cheeks and hard eyes, but missed the growing desperation that now consumed him. Every glance from passing townspeople felt like an accusation. Every whispered conversation a potential death sentence. Levi pulled his hat low and slipped through the alley behind Hannah's boarding house. She met him at the back door, baby Samuel cradled against her shoulder, the infant's breathing steady and peaceful. The contrast between the child's serenity and the chaos surrounding his discovery struck Levi like a physical blow. "They've got half the territory looking for you," Hannah whispered, her eyes scanning the alley nervously. "Sheriffs organized 3 search parties. They think you've got accomplices hiding somewhere in the mountains." Levi's jaw tightened. "I've got maybe 6 hours before they think to search every building in town. After that, he didn't need to finish." They both knew what happened to men accused of crimes against children. "There's something else," Hannah continued, shifting Samuel to her other arm. Doc Henderson examined the baby more thoroughly. He says Samuel's been well cared for, clean, fed regularly, loved. This wasn't some random abandonment, Levi. Someone prepared for this. The words hit Levi like a revelation. Of course, no desperate parent leaves a healthy, well-tended baby in the snow without reason. Someone had planned this carefully, ensuring the child's survival. But who and why? "I'm going back to where I found him," Levi decided. "There's got to be a trail, something that'll lead me to whoever left him there." Hannah's hand found his arm. "Levi, no. The sheriff's got men combing those hills. If they catch you out there alone. If I stay here, I'm a dead man anyway." Levi looked down at baby Samuel, sleeping peacefully despite the storm of accusations surrounding him. This little one deserves better than having his rescuer branded a criminal. Someone out there knows the truth, and I'm going to find them. The ride back to the discovery site took Levi through terrain he'd covered just 2 days earlier, but everything felt different now. Every snapped branch might be evidence, every hoof print potentially crucial. He followed his own tracks backward, noting details he'd missed in his desperate rush to get Samuel to safety. The snow had been undisturbed when he'd first found the baby, but Levi's trained eyes now caught subtler signs. A depression near a cluster of pine trees suggested someone had camped there recently. Dismounting, he brushed away fresh snowfall and found the charred remains of a small fire. Carefully built, economically maintained. This wasn't the work of some panicked parent making a rash decision. Following the faint trail, Levi discovered more evidence of careful planning. A lean-to shelter constructed from pine boughs, positioned to protect against the prevailing wind. Inside, he found something that made his blood run cold. Dark stains in the snow, partially covered but unmistakable. Blood, and quite a bit of it. But these weren't signs of violence. The blood was contained, controlled, like someone had been coughing it up over time. Levi had seen enough men die of consumption during the war to recognize the pattern. Whoever had been here was dying slowly and painfully. Near the shelter's entrance, he found more telling evidence. 3 empty bottles that had once contained milk, their labels still partially readable. Someone had been feeding baby Samuel carefully, measuring out portions, making supplies last as long as possible. This wasn't abandonment. This was preparation. The trail led deeper into the wilderness, marked by increasingly desperate camps. Each site told the same story. A dying person caring for an infant, moving constantly, but growing weaker. The shelters became more rudimentary, the fires smaller, the bloodstains more frequent. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Levi found the most heartbreaking evidence yet. A crude grave marker carved from pine bark. The letters, etched with a knife blade, were simple but profound. Beloved wife and mother, Mary Carter, 1868. Carter. Levi committed the name to memory. So the baby's father was likely named Carter, and he'd lost his wife, probably in childbirth, given Samuel's age. A widowed father, dying of consumption, caring for an infant alone in the wilderness. The pieces were finally falling into place. The trail beyond the grave marker showed increased urgency. The camps were closer together now, suggesting someone could only travel short distances before collapsing. Blood in the snow became more frequent, the shelters more desperate. Whoever this Carter was, he was running out of time fast. Levi pushed his horse harder as storm clouds gathered overhead. If the dying man was still alive, another blizzard would finish him. And despite everything, the wanted posters, the manhunt, the threat of hanging, Levi knew he couldn't let that happen. This man held the key to Samuel's future and Levi's freedom. The wind picked up as Levi crested a ridge, and there, in a small valley below, he saw smoke rising from what might be the most pitiful shelter he'd ever witnessed. It was little more than a few branches leaned against a boulder, inadequate protection against the approaching storm. Levi approached carefully, unsure what he'd find. The coughing reached him first, deep, racking sounds that spoke of lungs filling with fluid. Then he saw him, a man barely 40 but aged decades by disease, huddled beside a dying fire, his shirt stained with blood. Caleb Carter looked up as Levi dismounted, his eyes holding neither surprise nor fear, just infinite weariness. "You found him," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. "My boy, is he?" "He's safe," Levi replied, kneeling beside the dying man. Fed, warm, being cared for by a good woman. Caleb's eyes filled with tears, relief flooding his gaunt features. "Thank God. I prayed someone good would find him." Another coughing fit seized him, bringing up more blood. Please don't make me take him back. I'm dying, you see. Consumption. I've got days, maybe hours left." Levi felt his anger evaporating, replaced by profound understanding. "You left him where someone would find him. You made sure he'd survive. I couldn't watch him starve." Caleb struggled to sit up straighter. His mother died birthing him. Been just us for 6 months. Well, I got too sick to hunt, too weak to travel to town for supplies. He gestured helplessly. "What choice did I have?" "The whole town thinks I stole him," Levi explained. "Sheriff's got one of posters up, search parties out. If I don't bring back proof of what really happened." Caleb nodded weakly, understanding immediately. With tremendous effort, he reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "Adoption papers," he gasped. "Had them drawn up, in case. Just need someone worthy to sign them." Levi stared at the documents. Legal adoption papers, professionally prepared, with Caleb Carter listed as the biological father and a blank line where the adoptive father's name should go. This dying man had thought of everything, even ensuring his son would have legal protection. "I can't," Levi protested. "I'm a drifter. No family, no permanent home. Your boy deserves better than." "You saved him," Caleb interrupted, his voice gaining unexpected strength. "Rode through a blizzard to get him help. Risked your freedom to find his father. If that's not worthy." Another coughing fit cut him off. The storm was intensifying now, snow beginning to fall in earnest. Levi knew they had to move soon or risk being trapped. But Caleb was too weak to travel, and Levi couldn't abandon him to die alone in the wilderness. "There's a woman in town," Levi said carefully. "Hannah Mitchell. She's been caring for Samuel, and she believes in me when nobody else will." Caleb managed to smile. A woman who'd care for a stranger's child. Sounds like the mother Samuel needs. "What you're asking, it would change everything. My whole life. Mine too," Caleb replied softly. "But some things are worth changing everything for." He looked directly into Levi's eyes. "My son deserves a father who'll choose him every day, not just find him by accident." Levi felt something fundamental shifting inside him. Old walls crumbling under the weight of this dying man's trust. "If I sign these papers, Then Samuel Carter becomes Samuel Morrison, Caleb finished. And you become the father I can't live long enough to be. The wind howled around them as Levi took the pen from Caleb's trembling hand. In the failing light, surrounded by the wilderness that had brought them together, he signed his name to a future he'd never imagined possible. Caleb smiled as he witnessed the signature with his own shaking hand. "Now he's yours," he whispered. "Legally, officially, forever. We need to get back to town," Levi said, helping Caleb to his feet. "You should see him one more time." Caleb leaned heavily against Levi as they struggled toward the horse. "I don't know if I'll make it that far." "Then we'll make it together," Levi replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. A son should know his father, even if it's just for a few hours. As they mounted up, Caleb barely conscious in Levi's arms, the storm closed in around them. But Levi pressed forward, driven by something deeper than duty now. He was taking a father home to see his son one last time. The ride back to Millbrook would be the longest of Levi's life, and Caleb Carter's last. The ride back to Millbrook tested every ounce of Levi's frontier endurance. Caleb Carter drifted in and out of consciousness, his body racked with coughing fits that painted the snow beneath them with crimson droplets. Each labored breath might be his last, yet the dying man clung to life with desperate determination. "Tell me about him," Caleb whispered during a lucid moment, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "My boy, what's he like?" Levi adjusted his grip on the reins, Caleb's weight growing heavier against his chest. "Strong lungs, that's certain. Nearly woke the entire town when I brought him in. But he's got gentle eyes, like he's already seen too much of the world's hardness." "That's his mother in him." Caleb managed a weak smile. "Mary always said babies know things we forget. They can sense love and loss." Another coughing fit seized him, more violent than before. As they descended toward the valley where Millbrook lay nestled, Caleb's breathing became increasingly shallow. Levi feared they were too late, that Samuel would never know the man who'd sacrificed everything for his survival. But Caleb seemed to draw strength from some hidden reserve, his eyes focusing with sudden clarity. "There's more you need to know," he said, his voice gaining unexpected strength. "About why I had to do this." Levi slowed his horse, sensing the importance of this moment. Snow continued falling around them, creating an intimate cocoon of confession in the vast wilderness. "Mary and we tried for years to have a child," Caleb began, each word carefully measured against his failing breath. "Lost 3 babies before Samuel. When Mary finally carried him to term, we thought our prayers were answered." His voice broke. "She died bringing him into this world. Bled out in my arms while I held our son." The pain in Caleb's voice cut deeper than any winter wind. Levi had lost his own family, but to lose a wife in the moment of ultimate joy, it was a cruelty that defied comprehension. "For 6 months, it was just us," Caleb continued. "I learned to change his cloths, to feed him goat's milk from a bottle, to sing him to sleep with lullabies Mary used to hum. He became everything. My purpose, my reason for drawing breath." "Then why leave him?" Levi asked gently, though he already suspected the answer. Caleb's laugh turned into another coughing fit. When he recovered, his shirt front was soaked with blood. "Started coughing in late fall. Thought it was just the cold. But it got worse, and I recognized the signs. My brother died of consumption 5 years ago. I knew what was coming." The lights of Millbrook appeared through the storm, warm and welcoming against the harsh landscape. Levi urged his horse faster, but Caleb raised a trembling hand. "Let me finish," he pleaded. "You need to understand. I didn't abandon my son. I saved him." Levi reined in his horse, giving Caleb the time he desperately needed. "By January, I could barely hunt. Missed more shots than I made, too weak to track wounded game. Our supplies ran low, then ran out completely. I tried to make it to town for help, but collapsed halfway there. Spent 2 days in the snow, delirious with fever. Caleb's eyes grew distant, reliving those desperate moments. When I came to, Samuel was crying, had been crying for hours. His lips were blue from cold, his little body shaking. I had no food for him, no milk, no way to get to town. I was dying, and he was dying with me. Levi felt his throat tighten. The image of a father watching his infant son slowly starve was almost unbearable. That's when I knew, Caleb whispered. If I try to keep him with me, we'd both die in that wilderness. But if I could get him to where good people would find him. He looked directly into Levi's eyes. I'd rather live knowing my son was alive and loved by strangers than die knowing I'd taken him with me. The simple courage of that decision struck Levi like a physical blow. To choose his child's life over his own need to hold on to him. It was the purest form of love he'd ever witnessed. So I planned it carefully, Caleb continued. Found that spot near the trading post, a place where travelers pass regularly. I fed him every drop of milk I had left, wrapped him in his mother's shawl, and waited until I heard horses approaching. Then I placed him where you'd be sure to find him. You were watching, Levi realized. From the tree line. I saw you stop, saw you pick him up. The way you held him. So careful, so protective. I knew God had answered my prayer. You were exactly what Samuel needed. They were at the town's edge now. But Caleb gestured for Levi to stop once more. With tremendous effort, he reached into his coat and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. This was Mary's, he said, placing the bundle in Levi's hand. Her wedding ring. I want you to give it to that woman you mentioned. Hannah. If she's going to be Samuel's mother, she should have this. Levi unwrapped the cloth, revealing a simple gold band worn smooth by years of love. It wasn't valuable by any measure except the most important one. Caleb, I can't. You can. You must. Caleb's voice carried the authority of a dying man's final wish. Mary would want her ring to stay with her son. And if Hannah's going to raise him, she's Mary now. Do you understand? Levi nodded, too moved to speak. He carefully rewrapped the ring and tucked it safely in his pocket. There's one more thing, Caleb said as they entered the town proper. When Samuel's old enough to understand, tell him about his mother. Tell him Mary loved him so much she gave her life to bring him into this world. And tell him his father loved him enough to let him go. The main street of Millbrook was unusually busy despite the late hour and harsh weather. Word of Levi's return had spread quickly, and townspeople emerged from their homes despite the storm. Sheriff Coleman stood waiting outside the doctor's office, his hand notably far from his gun. Morrison, the sheriff called out. That the man we've been looking for? This is Caleb Carter, Levi replied, dismounting carefully with Caleb in his arms. Samuel's father. He's got consumption, dying. Wanted to see his boy one last time. The crowd murmured in amazement as Levi carried Caleb toward the doctor's office. The wanted posters that had branded Levi a criminal just hours earlier now seemed like accusations against an innocent man. The adoption papers are signed and witnessed, Caleb managed to tell Sheriff Coleman. Legal and binding. Levi Morrison is Samuel's father now. Dr. Henderson took charge immediately, directing Levi to carry Caleb to his examination room. Hannah appeared at Levi's side, baby Samuel in her arms, her face full of questions and relief. Is this, she began, Samuel's birth father? Levi confirmed. Caleb Carter. He's been caring for the baby alone since his wife died in childbirth. Left Samuel where someone would find him because he knew he was dying. Hannah's expression transformed from confusion to profound understanding. She approached Caleb's stretcher, holding Samuel where his birth father could see him clearly. Caleb's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his son, clean, healthy, content in Hannah's arms. He's grown, Caleb whispered. Look how he's grown. Samuel seemed to sense something familiar about the gaunt man on the stretcher. The baby reached out with tiny fingers, touching Caleb's hand with innocent curiosity. "Hello, my boy," Caleb breathed. "Daddy's here. Daddy's finally here." The room fell silent except for Caleb's labored breathing and the soft sounds of Samuel's contentment. Levi watched this reunion of father and son, knowing it would also be their farewell. Caleb looked up at Hannah, his eyes taking in her gentle demeanor and protective stance. "You're the one who's been caring for him." "Yes, sir," Hannah replied softly. "Then you're his mother now," Caleb said with simple finality. He gestured weakly to Levi. "Show her." Levi withdrew Mary's wedding ring from his pocket, unwrapping it carefully. Hannah gasped when she saw it, understanding immediately what was being offered. "This was Samuel's birth mother's ring," Levi explained. "Caleb wants you to have it, if you're willing to be Samuel's mother officially." Hannah looked from the ring to Levi to Caleb, tears streaming down her face. "Ah, yes. Yes, of course." With shaking hands, Levi slipped the ring onto Hannah's finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been meant for her all along. Caleb smiled, an expression of peace settling over his gaunt features. "Now he is everything," he whispered. "A father, a mother, a name, and a future." Dr. Henderson approached quietly. "Mr. Carter needs rest. His condition is very advanced." Caleb nodded, understanding. He looked at Levi one final time. "Take good care of each other. All of you. We will," Levi promised. "And remember what I told you. When he's old enough, tell him the truth. Tell him his father's last words were about how much he loved him." As Dr. Henderson prepared to move Caleb to a more comfortable room, the dying man's eyes found Samuel one more time. The baby was sleeping peacefully in Hannah's arms, unaware that he was in the presence of the man who'd given up everything to ensure his survival. "Thank you," Caleb whispered to Levi, "for finding him, for saving him, for becoming the father I couldn't live to be." Levi felt something fundamental settling into place in his chest, a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. "Thank you for trusting me with him." Caleb Carter smiled, closed his eyes, and let himself be carried away to spend his final hours in peace, knowing his son was loved, protected, and legally secure in the family he'd chosen for him. Outside, the storm was breaking, and the first stars appeared through the clearing clouds, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating this reunion of love, sacrifice, and hope. Caleb Carter's final hours unfolded in Dr. Henderson's small back room. With a dying rancher lay propped against pillows, baby Samuel cradled in his weakening arms. Levi and Hannah sat nearby, witnesses to a father's last precious moments with his son. "Tell me about his mother," Hannah said softly, adjusting the blanket around Samuel's tiny form. Caleb's eyes brightened despite his failing strength. "Mary had the softest voice, used to sing hymns while she worked. Samuel here, he calmed down the moment she started humming. He touched the baby's cheek with a trembling finger. She wanted children so badly. Lost 3 before this little one came along." "What was her favorite song?" Hannah asked, instinctively understanding that these details mattered. "Amazing Grace," Caleb whispered, said it reminded her that God's love could overcome any sorrow. He looked at Hannah meaningfully. Perhaps you could sing it to him sometimes?" "Every night," Hannah promised, her voice thick with emotion. Levi watched this exchange with growing amazement. Hannah wasn't just accepting Samuel into her heart. She was embracing his entire history, honoring the parents who came before. The wedding ring on her finger caught the lamplight, symbolizing a connection that transcended death itself. "There's something else," Caleb said, his breathing becoming more labored. "Mary's Bible. It's hidden under the floorboards of our cabin, wrapped in oilcloth. All of Samuel's birth records are with it, baptism certificate, everything he'll need someday." Levi memorized the location carefully. "I'll retrieve it before the snows melt." In the front cover, Mary wrote letters. One for our son's wedding day, one for when he becomes a father himself. Caleb's voice grew faint. She believed God would let her speak to him somehow, even after A violent coughing fit seized Caleb, flecking his lips with blood. Dr. Henderson approached with laudanum, but Caleb waved it away weakly. Need to stay alert. Few more minutes with my boy. Samuel stirred his father's arms, tiny fist closing around Caleb's finger with surprising strength. The dying man smiled through his pain. Strong grip. He'll be a good man with the right guidance. Caleb looked directly at Levi. You'll teach him to be honest? Hardworking, I promise. And you, Caleb turned to Hannah, you'll tell him about kindness? About love that sacrifices every day of his life. Caleb nodded, satisfied. With tremendous effort, he lifted the baby to his lips and kissed Samuel's forehead tenderly. Daddy loves you, little one. Always remember, Daddy loves you. As if understanding the gravity of the moment, baby Samuel remained perfectly still, his large eyes fixed on the gaunt face above him. For a heartbeat, father and son existed in perfect communion. Take him now, Caleb whispered. I want to see him in his new mother's arms. Hannah accepted Samuel gently, settling him against her shoulder with practiced ease. Caleb watched with evident peace as his son nestled into Hannah's embrace, completely trusting and content. Perfect, Caleb breathed. Mary would be so happy. Dr. Henderson checked Caleb's pulse discreetly and caught Levi's eye, shaking his head slightly. Minutes, not hours. Caleb seemed to sense the approaching end. Levi, come closer. Levi leaned in, and Caleb gripped his hand with surprising strength. 20 years from now, when Samuel asks about his father, don't tell him I abandoned him. Tell him I chose his life over my comfort. Tell him that's what real love does. I will. And tell him. Caleb's voice faded to barely a whisper. Tell him his mother and father will be watching over him always. Death doesn't end love, Levi. It just changes where it lives. Caleb's eyes found Samuel one final time, memorizing his son's face. Then, with a final, peaceful breath, the rancher's grip relaxed, and Caleb Carter passed into whatever comes after, his sacrifice complete. The silence that followed held profound reverence. Outside, the storm had finally broken, and dawnlight filtered through the frost-covered windows. Baby Samuel slept peacefully in Hannah's arms, unaware that he was now truly an orphan, and simultaneously more loved than ever before. Dr. Henderson gently closed Caleb's eyes and pulled a sheet over the still form. He went peacefully. That's a blessing. Levi stood slowly, feeling the full weight of his new responsibilities settling on his shoulders. He was no longer a drifter without ties or purpose. He was a father, a husband-to-be, a man with a family depending on him. Hannah rose and moved to his side, Samuel still sleeping in her arms. What do we do now? Levi looked down at the baby who had changed everything. First Caleb's life, then his own, and now Hannah's. We honor his sacrifice by living well, by raising his son to be the kind of man Caleb will be proud of. Together, Levi smiled, his first genuine smile in years. Together, as the sun rose over Millbrook, casting golden light across the snow-covered landscape, three lives began their new chapter, bound not by blood alone, but by a love forged in sacrifice and sealed by choice. 20 years later, 1894, Samuel Carter Morrison stood beside his adoptive father's deathbed, his own infant son sleeping peacefully in his arms. At 20, Samuel had grown into the kind of man both his fathers would have been proud of, strong, honest, with calloused hands that spoke of hard work and a gentle heart that reflected careful upbringing. Levi's weathered face turned toward his son, eyes still sharp despite his failing body. Samuel, it's time you knew the whole truth about how you came to us. I know the story, Pa. You found me in the snow, brought me to Ma Hannah. That's not the whole truth, Levi interrupted gently. Sit down, son. There's more. Hannah entered quietly, her hair now silver, but her eyes as kind as ever. She settled beside Samuel, her hand finding his free one as Levi began the story Samuel had never fully heard. Your birth father's name was Caleb Carter. He was a rancher, a good man who loved your mother Mary more than life itself. She died bringing you into this world, and Caleb raised you alone for 6 months. Samuel's eyes widened. He'd always wondered about the details Levi had kept vague over the years. Caleb didn't abandon you in that snow. Levi continued, his voice growing stronger with the importance of his words. He was dying of consumption, couldn't care for you anymore. But instead of letting you die with him, he made the hardest choice a father can make. Levi's eyes filled with tears as he recalled that desperate night. He planned everything carefully, fed you every drop of milk he had left, wrapped you in your birth mother's shawl, and placed you where he knew good people would find you. Then he watched from the trees to make sure you were safe. Samuel stared at his adoptive father, processing this revelation. He was watching when you found me, every moment. And when I picked you up, when I held you close and rode hard for town, Caleb knew his prayer had been answered. You weren't abandoned, son. You were saved by the greatest act of love I've ever witnessed. Hannah reached into her jewelry box and withdrew a small, worn Bible. This was your birth mother's. Caleb told us where to find it before he died. Inside, she wrote you letters for your wedding day and for when you became a father yourself. With trembling hands, Samuel opened the Bible's front cover. There, in faded ink, were 2 sealed envelopes marked in a woman's delicate script, for my son's wedding day, and for my son when he becomes a father. I can read them now, Samuel asked, his voice thick with emotion. The second one, yes, Hannah smiled through her tears. You've earned that right. Samuel carefully opened the envelope, marked for new fathers. Inside, his birth mother's words reached across 20 years of silence. My dear son, if you're reading this, then God has blessed you with a child of your own. Know that the love you feel for your baby is the same love I felt for you in my final moments. Love doesn't end with death, my precious boy. It transforms, it multiplies, it lives on through the generations. The hands that hold your child are guided by the same love that once held you. Be the father I know you'll be, and remember that your mother's love surrounds you always. Samuel looked down at his sleeping son, understanding flooding through him. She knew, somehow she knew I'd survive, that I'd have children of my own. And Caleb knew too, Levi added. His last words to me were about you. He said to tell you that his father loved you enough to let you go, and that death doesn't end love. It just changes where it lives. Samuel stood and walked to the window, looking out over the town of Millbrook where he'd grown up surrounded by love and acceptance. All these years, I thought I was an orphan who got lucky. But I wasn't an orphan at all. I had 4 parents, 2 who gave me life and 2 who raised me to live it well. That's exactly right, Hannah confirmed. Caleb Carter gave you life twice, once through birth, once through sacrifice. In your birth, Mother Mary gave you love that transcends death itself. Samuel turned back to his family, his infant son stirring in his arms. What was Caleb like in those final hours? Levi smiled at the memory. Peaceful. He held you one last time, kissed your forehead, and told us to teach you about sacrifice and real love. He died knowing you were safe, loved, and legally protected. I want to name this little one Caleb, Samuel decided suddenly. Caleb Morrison Carter. He should carry both names, honor both legacies. Hannah clapped her hands together, delighted. Your birth father would be so proud. As afternoon light streamed through the window, 4 generations were united in that small room. Levi, the dying adoptive father, Hannah, the devoted mother, Samuel, the bridge between past and future, and baby Caleb carrying the names of all who'd loved him into existence. Samuel looked at his adoptive father with profound gratitude. Thank you, Pa, for saving me, for raising me, for loving me as your own. Thank you for letting me be your father, Levi replied. You gave my life meaning when I thought it was over. As the sun set over Millbrook, Samuel stepped outside to visit the small cemetery where Caleb Carter lay buried. At the grave marker, he knelt with his infant son and spoke to the grandfather the child would never meet. "Your sacrifice wasn't in vain," Samuel whispered to the headstone. "I lived. I thrived. I found love, just like you hoped. And now your name lives on in this little one. Your love really did transform. It didn't end. It multiplied." Baby Caleb gurgled softly, as if acknowledging his namesake's presence. Samuel looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, he believed Caleb Carter and Mary Carter were watching, their love living on through the generations they made possible through sacrifice. The crying baby in the snow had become a man, a father, a bridge between sacrifice and hope. And in the quiet cemetery of a small frontier town, love proved once again that it really doesn't end. It just finds new ways to live forever.